Every man over 50 knows this truth, even if he spends half his life trying to drink it away or bury it under 60-hour work weeks. When your gut screams that something is wrong, it's not paranoia, it's pattern recognition. I had been ignoring the pattern for months, maybe years. The late nights, the sudden obsession with team-building exercises, the way her phone started living face down on the marble island in our kitchen. But that Tuesday, I decided to play the role of the doting idiot one last time. Linda had texted me at 4:30 p.m., the usual script about quarterly reports and a bottleneck in compliance. She said she'd be stuck until at least 9. I didn't text back. Instead, I drove to that little hole-in-the-wall Thai place on 4th she used to love before she started counting carbs like they were sins, and I bought the pad thai. Extra peanuts. Spicy. I walked into her building around 7:15 p.m. The security guard, an older guy named Earl who I'd tipped generously every Christmas for a decade, gave me a look I couldn't place at the moment. Before I go on, I'm documenting this whole mess because I know there are 1,000 other guys standing in my shoes right now, holding a bag of takeout and wondering if they're crazy. So if you want to see how deep the rabbit hole goes, hit that follow button now because I'm only telling this story once. Earl didn't smile. He actually reached for the phone as if to warn someone, then stopped, his hand hovering over the receiver like he was caught between duty and pity. I nodded at him. The elevator dinged, and I went up. The office floor was dead silent, the kind of silence that feels pressurized, like the air in a submarine. Most of the cubicles were dark, blue standby lights blinking in the gloom. Her office was at the end of the hall, the corner suite with the frosted glass. The light was on. I didn't stomp down the hallway. I didn't call out her name. I walked with the soft tread of a man who doesn't want to wake a sleeping child, or perhaps a man who is terrified of what he's about to see. I reached the door. It wasn't locked. That was the arrogance of it. They didn't even think they needed to lock the door because in their world, I was the predictable husband who was at home watching the game. I turned the handle and pushed. It wasn't a movie scene. It was worse because it was so mundane. Linda was on her desk, not the couch, not the floor, the mahogany desk I had bought her when she made partner. Her blouse was open, sliding off one shoulder, and Gavin, her boss, a man who had shaken my hand at the Christmas party and complimented my choice of scotch, was pressed against her, his hands gripping her waist with a familiarity that made bile rise in my throat. They were frantic, messy, completely lost in the dopamine hit of their own ego. Beside her hip, knocked flat by their movement, was a silver frame. Our wedding photo, face down. For a second, neither of them moved. The air conditioning hummed. The smell of the pad thai wafting from the bag in my hand seemed violently out of place, the scent of peanut sauce and lime clashing with the sterile office air, and the musk of their betrayal. Then Gavin froze. He looked up, his eyes widening, his face flushed red and shiny with sweat. Linda scrambled, pushing him back, clutching her shirt together, her mouth opening to form words that hadn't been invented yet. "Harry? Oh my God, Harry, it's not..." I didn't let her finish. I didn't scream. I didn't throw a punch. I didn't demand an explanation. The rage that hit me wasn't hot. It was absolute zero. It froze my heart instantly. I looked at the takeout bag in my hand, then at the filing cabinet next to the door. I walked over, placed the bag gently on top of the metal cabinet, and looked her dead in the eyes. She looked terrified, not because I was violent, but because she couldn't read me. I was a blank slate. "Enjoy the dinner," I said. My voice sounded strange, calm, like I was ordering coffee. "I got extra peanuts." I turned around. Behind me, I heard her scrambling off the desk, the sound of a zipper, the frantic click of her heels on the floor. "Harry, wait, you're misunderstanding. Stop." I didn't stop. I walked back down the hall, past the blinking blue lights, past the empty cubicles. I got into the elevator and pressed the button for the lobby. As the doors closed, I saw her running down the hallway, disheveled, looking smaller than I had ever seen her. The door shut, cutting off her voice. I stood in the descending box, staring at my reflection in the polished brass. I looked exactly the same as I had 5 minutes ago. But the man looking back at me was already calculating the liquidation of assets. The pad thai was getting cold upstairs. And so was I. I didn't go home. Going home is what the victim does, to wallow in the scent of the life they just lost. I wasn't a victim. I was a man, executing a protocol I hadn't realized I'd been writing in the back of my head for 3 years. I drove 3 blocks over to a parking structure that overlooked her office building's valet exit. It was dark, the concrete cold and stained with oil. I killed the engine, reclined the seat of my sedan just enough to be comfortable, and opened my laptop. The glow of the screen was the only light in the car. It was 7:42 p.m. My hands didn't shake. I logged into our primary joint checking account. It was the operational heart of our household. Mortgage, utilities, her car payments, her discretionary fund, which had ballooned suspiciously over the last 6 months. I initiated a transfer, not to my personal savings, but to a holding account for a dormant LLC I had set up years ago for freelance consulting I rarely did anymore. Orion Logistics. Sounds boring, right? Boring is invisible. I drained the checking account down to $15. Then I hit the savings, the emergency fund, the vacation fund. Click, transfer, confirm. I watched the progress bar fill up green. It was the most satisfying thing I had seen in a decade. Next, the credit cards. I logged into the Amex portal. I reported the primary card, the one currently in her purse, as lost. The system automatically flagged it, immediate suspension. I did the same for the Visa. At 8:05 p.m., I saw her emerge from the building. She was rushing, phone pressed to her ear. I looked down at my phone. It was buzzing silently on the passenger seat. Linda calling, Linda calling, Linda calling. I let it buzz. She reached the valet stand. I watched through the windshield as she handed the attendant her ticket. She looked frantic, her hair hastily pinned back up, but strands were loose. She was trying to maintain the boss lady composure, but her body language was screaming panic. The valet brought her car around, the Mercedes SUV I paid the lease on. She reached into her bag and handed him a card for the tip and the valet charge. The attendant swiped it. He frowned. He swiped it again. He looked at the card, then at her. He said something. She shook her head, annoyed, laughing that nervous laugh she does when she's trying to charm her way out of a screw-up. She handed him another card. He swiped. He shook his head again. From my vantage point, I could see the color drain from her face even at this distance. She was fumbling now, digging through her purse for cash. She didn't carry cash. She always said cash was for drug dealers and grandpas. She had to have the valet reverse the charge or bill it to her account, which I knew would also bounce. She got into the car, humiliated, peeling out of the lot with a screech of tires that echoed off the surrounding buildings. I waited 5 minutes, then started my car. I drove to the nearest extended stay hotel, paid cash for a week in a room that smelled like lemon disinfectant and stale cigarettes. I sat on the edge of the bed and opened the banking app again. A notification popped up. Transaction declined. Valet parking. $2,500. I smiled, but I wasn't done. I pulled up the smart home app on my phone. We had installed those convenient keyless entry locks last year. She loved them because she never had to fumble for keys. I went into the admin settings. User, Linda, access revoked. I changed the master code. Then, just to be thorough, I disabled the garage door opener remote access. I watched the live feed from the doorbell camera on my phone. 20 minutes later, her Mercedes pulled into the driveway. She jumped out, running to the front door. She punched in the code. Beep, beep, buzz, red light. She punched it in again, harder. Beep, beep, buzz. She tried the handle, locked. She stepped back, looking up at the house like it had suddenly grown teeth. She pulled out her phone and started calling me again. My phone on the hotel bed lit up. I didn't touch it. I watched her on the little screen, pounding on the door of the house she thought she owned, wearing the clothes she thought she looked good in, realizing for the first time that evening that the ground beneath her feet was actually a trap door. And I had just pulled the lever. The silence is what breaks people. Human beings are social creatures. We crave feedback, even if it's negative. If I had screamed at her, if I had sent her a text calling her a whore, she would have had something to push against. She could have villainized me, told herself I was unstable, irrational, but I gave her nothing. I was a black hole. For the next 3 days, I lived in that hotel room like a monk. I bought a burner phone and a new laptop at a big box store, paying cash. I forwarded my work emails to a private server and took personal leave. My actual phone, the one she was blowing up, was turned off and shoved in the hotel safe. I watched her descent through the digital periscope. She sent emails to my work address. Harry, please, you're scaring me. It was a mistake, a one-time thing. We were drunk. Where are you? I'm going to call the police. She wouldn't call the police. We both knew that. Calling the police meant filing a report, And filing a report meant admitting why her husband had vanished. It meant putting infidelity on the public record. Linda cared about her reputation more than she cared about her soul. She was trapped in a prison of her own vanity. On the second day, I met with Marcus. Marcus wasn't a strip mall divorce lawyer. He was a shark in a three-piece suit who specialized in high-conflict asset dissolution. I'd known him from my days in corporate risk management. His office smelled of old leather and expensive cologne. I laid it all out. The photos I hadn't taken, but described in detail, the financial logs, the timeline. "You have the prenup?" Marcus asked, tapping a gold fountain pen against his chin. "I do," I said, sliding the folder across the mahogany table. Clause 7B, the infidelity trigger. Most people don't read prenups, they sign them in a haze of wedding planning and optimism. But I had written that clause myself, and I had insisted on it not because I didn't trust her then, but because I'm a man who wears a belt and suspenders. The clause was specific. It didn't just void alimony. It triggered a vesting acceleration on the separation of assets acquired through joint enterprise. Basically, if she stepped out, the family money reverted to the originator, me. Marcus read it, his eyebrows climbing higher with every line. "Jesus, Harry, this is aggressive. She signed this?" "She was focused on the catering budget at the time," I said dryly. "Does she know you've moved the liquidity to Orion Logistics?" "She knows the cards don't work," I said. "She doesn't know why." Marcus smirked, a wolfish grin that made me glad he was on my side. "You know what she's doing right now? She's trying to figure out if she can access the HELOC on the house. She can't, right?" "Frozen," I said. "I flagged the account for potential identity theft the moment I left the office." "Cold," Marcus whispered. "I love it." He drafted the filing. Irreconcilable differences. Adultery cited with cause, restraining order based on financial instability and erratic behavior. We were going to hit her with a blitzkrieg before she even had time to hire a public defender. I went back to the hotel. I checked the doorbell cam. She was sitting on the front porch steps, head in her hands. She had eventually gotten into the house, probably called a locksmith and lied about losing her keys, but it didn't matter. The house was just wood and brick. The life inside it was gone. I zoomed in on the feed. Beside her on the porch step sat a package. Amazon delivery. I knew what it was. A set of expensive noise-canceling headphones she had ordered for Gavin's birthday. The irony was so thick I could taste it. She was sitting outside the home she destroyed, next to a gift for the man who helped her destroy it, waiting for the husband she betrayed to come save her. I turned off the feed. I had work to do. The meeting was scheduled for Friday morning. I hadn't spoken a word to her in 4 days. She had tried to corner me at my office, but security, briefed by me that an estranged relative might cause a scene, had turned her away at the turnstiles. That must have burned. Linda was used to breezing through doors. We met in the conference room of Marcus's firm, neutral ground, theoretically. She arrived with a lawyer I recognized, Brad something or other, a guy who did estate planning and probably coached Little League. He looked out of his depth. Linda looked wrecked. Her eyes were puffy, hidden behind oversized sunglasses she refused to take off. She was wearing a pale blue dress I had bought her for our anniversary 2 years ago. It was a tactical choice, an attempt to trigger a sentimental reflex she thought I still had. I didn't look at her. I looked at the papers in front of me. "Harry," she started, her voice cracking. "Can we just—" "Mr. Davison will speak through me," Marcus interrupted, his voice smooth as silk wrapped around a brick. "We are here to execute the separation agreement pursuant to the prenuptial contract signed August 14, 2008. Brad cleared his throat, puffing out his chest. "Now hold on. My client contends that the lockout from the marital home and the freezing of assets constitutes financial abuse. We are prepared to file a motion for immediate relief and temporary spousal support." Marcus didn't even look up from his file. He just slid a single piece of paper across the table. It wasn't the divorce papers. It was a printout of the Orion Logistics asset schedule cross-referenced with the prenup clause 7B. "There is no marital home," Marcus said boredly. "The property at 42 Maple Drive is owned by Orion Logistics, a limited liability company. Mr. Davison is the sole proprietor. Ms. Linda was a tenant at will. Her lease..." has been terminated due to a breach of conduct. Linda snatched the paper. That's a lie. My name is on the deed. Your name is on the trust as a beneficiary, Marcus corrected. Beneficiary status is contingent on the marriage remaining in good standing. Clause 7B. Shall I read it? Brad leaned over to read the document. I watched his face. He started with a confident frown, which slowly dissolved into a look of pure, unadulterated panic. He flipped the page. He looked at the signature, Linda's distinct, loopy autograph from 15 years ago. He looked at the date. Linda, Brad whispered, Did you read the addendum regarding the holding company? I don't know, she snapped, her voice rising to a screech. Harry handles the paperwork. He always said it was for tax purposes. It is for tax purposes, I said, speaking for the first time. My voice was raspy. And for protection against bad investments. You turned out to be a bad investment, Linda. She recoiled like I had slapped her. I made a mistake, Harry. One mistake. You can't take everything. I'm not taking everything, I said, leaning forward. I'm keeping what's mine. The car you drove here? Leased by Orion? The jewelry? Insured under Orion. The country club membership? Corporate account. Brad looked at Linda, then at Marcus. He closed his folder. He knew. He knew right then that he wasn't fighting a divorce case. He was fighting a corporate liquidation where his client was the distressed asset. We will need a recess to review these documents, Brad stammered. Take all the time you need, Marcus said, checking his Rolex. But be advised, the company car is scheduled for repossession at noon. I'd suggest calling an Uber. Linda stared at me. The sunglasses came off. Her eyes were red, rimmed with dark circles. For the first time, she wasn't looking at me with anger or manipulation. She was looking at me with fear. She realized that the quiet man who listened to her complain about her day for 15 years hadn't just been listening. I had been taking notes. And now I was grading the test. You can't contain a fire in a paper house. And corporate offices are made of the thinnest paper imaginable. Linda thought she could keep the affair quiet, that what happens in the C-suite stays in the C-suite. She was wrong. She forgot that I work in risk management and the world is smaller than people think. I didn't leak anything. I didn't have to. The valet incident, the sudden change in her demeanor, the fact that her husband had vanished. People talk. But the real nail in the coffin wasn't gossip, it was policy. A week after the confrontation, I sent a formal letter to the HR director of her company, not as a scorned husband, but as a shareholder. I owned a small but significant block of stock in her firm, part of my diversification strategy years ago. The letter was dry, legalistic. I requested an inquiry into potential conflicts of interest regarding executive leadership and direct subordinates, citing specific dates where company resources, dinners, travel, might have been misappropriated for personal use. I didn't name Linda. I didn't name Gavin. I just pointed at the smoke. The investigation started on a Monday. By Wednesday, the atmosphere in her office had shifted from awkward to radioactive. I heard about it from an old contact in their IT department, a guy named Stan, who I played poker with occasionally. It's a bloodbath, Harry, Stan told me over the phone. Compliance is auditing everything. Expense reports, travel logs, emails. They flagged Gavin for approving Linda's expenses for a conference in Miami that didn't exist. Linda tried to spin it. She told her team it was a routine audit. She tried to maintain the Iron Lady persona, but you can't lead when your team knows you're drowning. The whispers started in the break room, then the side eyes in the hallway. The kill shot came via email. I wasn't on the chain, obviously, but Stan read it to me. It was from the board of directors to all senior management, a reminder about the company's code of ethics regarding fraternization. It didn't mention names, but it didn't have to. It was a public shaming. Linda was called into a meeting with the VP of HR. She walked in expecting a slap on the wrist. She walked out stripped of her direct reports. They didn't fire her, not yet. That would invite a lawsuit. Instead, they put her on administrative leave pending the conclusion of the investigation. She was escorted out. That's the part that hurts the most for people like Linda. It's not the loss of income. It's the loss of access. Her ID badge, which she wore like a Medal of Honor, didn't work on the turnstile. She had to ask the security guard, Earl, the same guy who saw me with the Thai food to let her out. Stan told me Earl didn't even make eye contact. He just buzzed the door. I sat in my new apartment, a quiet, modern place across town, and imagined that moment. Her standing in the lobby, holding a box of her things, realizing that the building she had practically lived in for 10 years had just spit her out like a bad taste. She had lost her husband, her home, and now her kingdom. And the only thing she had left was Gavin. But rats don't stick together when the ship sinks. They climb over each other to breathe. Social circles are fragile ecosystems. They rely on a delicate balance of shared history and mutual benefit. When a marriage implodes, people don't just choose sides based on morality, they choose sides based on stability. And Linda was radioactive. She tried to rally the troops. I could see the patterns on the phone bill before I cut it off completely. She texted our mutual friends, the couples we'd vacationed with in Cabo, the neighbors we'd had over for endless barbecues. She was looking for a shoulder to cry on, someone to validate her narrative that I was a monster who had overreacted. But here's the thing about our friends. I was the one who helped Dave with his taxes. I was the one who fixed Sarah's network when her small business got hacked. I was the reliable one. Linda was the fun one, the one who drank too much Chardonnay and gossiped. Fun is great for a Friday night. Reliability is who you call when your life falls apart. One by one, they ghosted her. Dave sent me a text. Harry, heard what happened. I'm sorry, man. If you need a beer, I'm around. We're not answering her calls. Simple. Brutal. Even her own sister Brenda wavered. Brenda had always been jealous of Linda's perfect life. Now that the perfection was exposed as a fraud, Brenda wasn't rushing to help. She was watching the crash with a bucket of popcorn. Linda called her, begging to stay in her guest room because the hotels were draining her cash. I can't, Lynn, Brenda told her. I know this because Brenda called me to tell me she said it. Mike doesn't want the drama around the kids. The drama. That's what Linda was now. She wasn't a person in crisis. She was a walking contagion of drama. The isolation started to gnaw at her. I saw her on social media. She was still posting, trying to project normalcy. A photo of a latte with the caption, "New Beginnings." But the likes were down. The comments were turned off. She was shouting into a void. There was one specific moment that sealed her exile. We had a group chat with 3 other couples. The wine club. I left the group quietly the day I moved out. Linda stayed, assuming she would inherit the group. She tried to organize a meetup, a girls' night, to plead her case. Silence. Then Sarah posted a photo in a new group chat, one Linda wasn't in but which I had been added to by Dave. It was a picture of the gang at our favorite steakhouse. The caption, "Here's to loyalty." Linda must have found out. Maybe she saw it on someone's phone or heard about it. The rejection wasn't just about losing friends. It was about realizing that her social currency was counterfeit. She thought people loved her for her charm. Turns out they tolerated her because she was with me. Without the anchor, she was just drifting debris. I sat in my apartment, staring at a bottle of scotch Dave had dropped off. I didn't open it. I didn't want to celebrate. This wasn't a victory. It was a controlled demolition. And watching the dust settle was lonelier than I expected. Legal battles aren't won in courtrooms. They're won in discovery. And while Linda was worried about the divorce proceedings, she completely forgot about the corporate liability she had created. The investigation at her company wasn't just about ethics, it was about money. It always is. Gavin, in his infinite arrogance, had been billing his meetings with Linda to client accounts, dinners, hotel rooms, even travel. That's fraud. And when you commit fraud, you give the company a weapon to destroy you without paying a cent of severance. But they needed proof beyond reasonable doubt. They needed a smoking gun. I knew where it was. Years ago, I had consulted on the security protocols for their building. I knew that the internal conference rooms, the ones with the privacy glass, had cameras. They didn't record audio, just video, intended for asset protection. The feed was archived on a rolling 90-day server loop. Linda didn't know this. She thought closing the door and hitting the "Do Not Disturb" button made her invisible. I didn't hack anything. I didn't have to. I simply mentioned the existence of archive server B12 to the external auditor hired by the board during a casual LinkedIn exchange. I framed it as a helpful tip to ensure comprehensive data retrieval. The deposition came 2 weeks later. Linda was subpoenaed as a witness in the company's suit against Gavin. She thought she could plead ignorance. She sat there, deposed under oath, claiming their relationship was strictly professional outside of a few lapses in judgment. Then the lawyers played the tape. It wasn't an intimacy tape, it was worse. It was a video of them in conference room 4 at 2 p.m. on a Tuesday. They weren't working. They were drinking expensive wine billed to a client and watching Netflix on the company projector for 3 hours. The timestamp in the corner of the screen blinked relentlessly. 14:03:22, 14:03:23. Linda stared at the screen. The color drained from her face. It wasn't the intimacy that damned her. It was the theft. Theft of time. Theft of resources. She was watching herself steal from the people who signed her paycheck. Ms. Davison, the corporate attorney said, pausing the video on a frame where she was clearly laughing, holding a glass of wine, feet up on the table. Can you explain how this meeting contributed to the Q3 projections? She couldn't speak. She opened her mouth, closed it, and looked at her lawyer. Her lawyer looked at the ceiling. That video changed everything. It shifted the narrative from workplace romance to conspiracy to defraud. It meant she wasn't just getting fired, she was potentially liable for damages. The timestamp was the key. It proved premeditation. It proved she wasn't a victim of passion, she was a parasite. I heard about the deposition from Marcus. He was practically giddy. Harry, he said, this footage is admissible in our divorce case too. It proves dissipation of marital assets. Her time and earning potential were wasted on this affair. We can argue that her firing is a direct result of her misconduct, negating any claim she has for support based on lost income. I looked at the screenshot Marcus had sent me. The timestamp, the blurry image of her laughing. She looked so happy, so carefree. She had no idea that the camera lens was essentially a rifle scope, and she was dancing in the crosshairs. The corporate machine moves slowly until it doesn't. When it decides to cut a limb, it brings down the blade with terrifying speed. The letter didn't come via email, it came via courier to the temporary apartment she was renting. A dingy, one-bedroom place she had to scramble to find after her sister said no. I received a copy because my name was still technically on some of her emergency contact forms, and the courier service was thorough. It was on thick, cream-colored cardstock. The logo of the firm was embossed in silver at the top. It was beautiful stationery for a death warrant. Dear Ms. Davison, it began. Effective immediately, your employment is terminated for cause. For cause, those two words are the scariest words in the corporate lexicon. They mean no severance, no continuation of benefits, no positive reference. And, in her case, it meant the activation of the clawback clause in her contract. They were demanding the repayment of her signing bonus from 2 years ago, prorated plus the reimbursement of the fraudulent expenses. The total was in the mid-5 figures. She was broke, her credit cards were frozen by me, her bank accounts were empty, and now she owed her former employer $50,000. She tried to call the chairman of the board. He was a man she had bragged about having coffee with, a mentor. He didn't answer. His executive assistant blocked the number. She drove to the office to plead her case, to beg. Security Earl again stopped her at the revolving doors. He had a box waiting for her, a standard issue banker's box. It contained a framed photo of her dog, a stapler, and a few books. They hadn't even packed her awards. Those belonged to the company now. She stood on the sidewalk, holding the box. It was raining, a cliché, I know, but nature has a sense of humor. People walked past her, former colleagues, people she had lunched with. They looked at their phones, they looked at the traffic, they looked anywhere but at her. She was a ghost. I saw the aftermath because she did the one thing she shouldn't have done. She called me. She left a voicemail. She wasn't screaming this time. She was sobbing. Harry, they took everything. Please, I don't have anywhere to go. I can't pay the rent. Please, just help me fix this. I listened to the message in my car. I looked at the rain hitting the windshield. I felt a twinge of pity, a small, dull ache in my chest. But then I remembered the pad thai on the filing cabinet. I remembered the arrogance in her eyes when she told the valet to charge the card again. I remembered the years of gaslighting. I didn't delete the message. I saved it. It was evidence of her financial state, proof that she was desperate. In a custody battle for assets, desperation is leverage. I forwarded the audio file to Marcus. Add this to the file, I typed. The box she held on that sidewalk was the symbol of her new reality. Empty, cardboard, and disposable. Just like she had treated our marriage. I never spoke to the press. Talking to the media is messy. You lose control of the story the moment you open your mouth. But silence creates a vacuum, and vacuums get filled. A month after the firing, a podcast called Corporate Guillotine, one of those insider business shows that dissects executive scandals, dropped an episode titled The Silent Partner. They didn't name me, they didn't name Linda. But they laid out the case with forensic precision. The source was an anonymous retired partner. I suspected it was one of the guys I played golf with, someone who admired the sheer brutality of the legal maneuvering. The host, a sharp-voiced woman named Sarah, broke it down. "What's fascinating here isn't the affair," she said into the microphone. "Affairs happen. What's fascinating is the response. The husband didn't get mad. He got legal. He weaponized the company's own bylaws against the unfaithful spouse. He turned the bureaucracy into his personal avenger. The episode went viral in our industry. It became a case study on LinkedIn. Are you protected against the infidelity clause? It became a trending topic. Linda heard it. I know she did because the comments section was flooded with people dissecting the wife's stupidity. They called her a liability. They called her amateur. For a narcissist like Linda, being called evil is manageable. It makes you powerful. Being called stupid is a mortal wound. She was reading the comments. I could see her digital footprint. She was obsessively refreshing the page, maybe even creating burner accounts to defend herself, only to get shouted down by the internet mob. The narrative had shifted permanently. She wasn't the victim of a vindictive husband. She was the architect of her own destruction who had underestimated the quiet guy in the corner. I sat in my living room, listening to the podcast on my surround sound. The host's voice filled the room. In the end, the host said, he took back his life not by shouting, but by closing the ledger. It was a business decision, and she was a bad asset. On the screen of my laptop, the audio waveform spiked and dipped, up and down, like a heartbeat. It was the only heartbeat left in the story. Linda was socially dead, professionally buried, and financially erased. And I hadn't lifted a finger in anger. 6 months later, the divorce was finalized. The judge, seeing the mountain of evidence and the ironclad prenup, had ruled in my favor on almost every count. Linda got nothing but her personal effects and the debt she had accrued. I was at a grocery store, a high-end, organic place I had started shopping at since I took up cooking again. I was loading bags into the trunk of my new car, a dark gray coupe sleeker than the sedans I used to drive. I felt lighter. I had lost 20 pounds, not from stress, but from hitting the gym. I looked younger. "Harry?" The voice was thin, hesitant. I froze for a second, then turned slowly. It was her. She looked faded. That's the only word for it. The designer clothes were gone, replaced by jeans and a generic sweater. Her hair was pulled back, lacking the expensive sheen it used to have. She looked like a stranger who vaguely resembled someone I used to know. She was holding a basket with a few items: generic brand cereal, a loaf of bread, a bottle of cheap wine. "Hi, Linda," I said. My voice was steady. No anger, no longing, just recognition. She took a step forward, her eyes searching my face for a crack, a sign of the old Harry who would have folded. "You look good," she whispered. "I feel good," I said. I turned back to my trunk and put the last bag in. "Harry, please," she said, her voice trembling. "Can we just talk? 5 minutes. I just want to understand. I want to apologize properly. I miss you, not the money, not the house. You." I looked at her, really looked at her. I saw the fear in her eyes, the loneliness, but I also saw the calculation. She was testing the waters, looking for a handhold to climb back up. "Talk?" I asked, leaning against the car. "We talked for 15 years, Linda. You just weren't listening." "I'm listening now," she pleaded. Tears were welling up. "Please, just, coffee?" I looked down at one of my grocery bags. Right on top was a bar of dark chocolate with sea salt, her favorite. I used to buy it for her every Friday. It was a reflex, a muscle memory I hadn't fully trained out of my system yet. I reached into the bag and pulled out the chocolate bar. The foil wrapper glinted in the late afternoon sun. Her eyes lit up. She thought it was a peace offering. She thought it was a bridge. She took a half step forward, her hand raising slightly to accept it. I placed the chocolate bar gently on the hood of her car, a dented sedan that clearly wasn't hers. "For the road," I said softly. Then I turned around, got into my driver's seat, and closed the door. The sound was solid, final. I started the engine. As I pulled out of the parking spot, I checked the rearview mirror. She was standing there, staring at the chocolate bar. On the hood of the car, she hadn't picked it up. She looked small, framed by the asphalt and the setting sun, she finally understood. The chocolate wasn't a gift, it was a severance package. I turned onto the main road and didn't look back. The road ahead was clear, and for the first time in a long time, I was driving it alone. And I liked the silence.